Hi, this is Gila. In our crazy world, where it appears news, certainly from much of the mainstream media, is less about actual facts and more about politicised machinations to promote a left-leaning agenda and vilifying attitudes that don't fit that kind of worldview, where the programmes made by TV companies seem to be ever more violent and usually rather dark in tone. Where popular music, it seems, has largely devolved into computer-generated rhythmic thumps and squeals and bleeps. And politically, the bleak imaginary world of Orwell's 1984 sadly appears to be becoming closer to reality than before. One dark tide is clearly re-emerging on the world stage: anti-Semitism. Now, it is normal for people as they grow older to view various changes with concern. I remember as a girl growing up in the 1970s, older people decrying the growing sex and violence on TV, the arrival of punk and disco music, and the changing and more permissive sexual attitudes from when my parents got married in the 1950s. And in retrospect, the 1970s were actually a particularly interesting and creative time for popular music. But at that time, anti-Semitism was universally condemned throughout the Western world. The horrors of the Holocaust were too recent in most people's memories. Anyone who actively promoted anti-Semitism was immediately censored and usually turned into a social outcast for doing so. Not so today. With the appalling anti-Semitic cartoons in the New York Times, the endemic anti-Semitism in the British Labour Party, and growing in the American Democrats, in the left wing this time rather than the right, and the false narrative that delegitimizing the rights of the indigenous Jewish people to live and to flourish freely in their one and only Jewish nation state and ancient homeland of Israel is somehow not anti-Semitic, when the reality is, of course it is. Many Jews are understandably becoming more uncomfortable in the West. The truth is that anti-Semitism is essentially as old as the Jewish people. It has risen throughout history in many different forms, among many different civilizations. Jews have been expelled from many countries in history, sometimes more than once, and persecuted and murdered simply because of who they are. But while their persecutors have vanished into the dustbin of history, Jews are still here. Many in recent times have returned home to Israel, as some Jewish prophets in the Bible actually predicted over 2,500 years ago. Check out Ezekiel chapter 36, for instance. And Hebrew, a language used only for religious purposes for 2,000 years, has re-emerged into a vibrant modern language, which is the mother tongue of most Israeli Jews today. Jews have been attacked in the past for being too rich, for being too poor, for supposedly poisoning wells and causing disease, for needing the blood of a Christian or a Muslim for their Passover matzahs, which of course don't contain blood, and actually eating blood is forbidden by the Torah, for refusing to give up their own traditions and religious understanding to embrace another newer one, and so on. Jews have been accused of all sorts of contradictory things over millennia, and anti-Semitism is alive and well and kicking, especially today, sadly, among many Muslims, due to some offensive anti-Jewish slurs in the Quran and Hadith, but also among some other people who are usually inclined to believe in some variety of racial supremacy, even though Modern geneticists have discovered that as human beings, we are all great mixtures of various past racial groupings that have since disappeared, including among most of us some Neanderthal ancestry as well. And especially amongst those sick individuals who have attacked and murdered peaceful Jews worshipping in their synagogues, most recently in Pittsburgh and San Diego, or simply going about their everyday business. Any kind of hatred and bigotry towards other people simply because they are different in some way is deeply wrong. And that is why personally I have taken pains, while criticizing the evil aspects of Islamic ideology where non-Muslims are concerned, to make clear that I am always talking about ideology, never about Muslims as fellow human beings who deserve the same respect and dignity as everyone else. Now, certainly, there are a growing number of French Jews returning to their homeland of Israel who can no longer tolerate the anti-Semitism that has been growing in France. The same could well happen to British and other West European Jews for similar reasons. Personally, I am of the opinion that the real reasons behind anti-Semitism lie ultimately more in the realm of the spiritual. But whatever the motives behind the vilification of the Jewish people, anti-Semitism today is just as wrong as it always was. And it needs to be called out for the evil that it truly is, and condemned, before it gets any worse and leads to more overt persecution and many more murders, as tragically it always has done in the past. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day, a good week, good weekend. Thank you. Goodbye.